Hi, my name is Kiki Soto. I'm the comment managing editor for The Southerner, and I believe that test-optional universities are beneficial for students.
Hi, I'm Joe Earles. I'm a staff writer specializing in comments, and I think that it is not a good thing that so many new test-optional colleges and universities are becoming the norm.
So recently, why this whole debate has been brought up again is because University of Chicago, which is a very competitive school, has decided to be test optional as of this year for the recruiting process and academic process for the next year for seniors. I believe that test optional universities provide the best of both worlds for all students. Students with test anxiety and students with high GPAs can still have a chance of getting into these better universities. And also, just because this school is test optional, it doesn't mean that you still can't submit your test scores. It's just that students who prefer not to don't have to.
Yeah. So essentially the reason that test optional universities and colleges are not a good thing is because tests or standardized tests are a good thing. And since they're not requiring them, they're putting the stress and importance on these SATs and ACTs at a lower level that they normally are. And the biggest reason that SATs and ACTs are incredibly beneficial to students and colleges throughout the United States can be seen within the name of the SAT, or the Standardized Aptitude Test. The first benefit of these standardized tests comes from the fact that they are simply standardized, right? So throughout the United States, no matter where a test is being given, no matter which test it is, a 1600 on the SAT will mean the same thing from a student taking it from Grady High School or a student taking it from a high school in Washington. However, with many GPAs being calculated, scores from different high schools can mean very different things. Additionally, the aptitude part of the Standardized Aptitude Test, which is also very similar to the ACT, is important because aptitude measures a student's ability rather than what they have simply learned. So if a student goes to a very poor performing school and they're in a very hard situation where their teachers are not teaching them what they ought to be teaching them, they can take the Standardized Aptitude Test, or ACT, that is able to test their reading comprehension or basic math skills as opposed to what someone else has taught them. And colleges need to be able to see what someone is able to learn as opposed to what their high school has taught them. Therefore, SATs and ACTs, or just standardized testing in general, is necessary and beneficial for college application processes.
Going back to Joe's point about GPAs and how it's hard to see everyone on the same level with GPAs, and that's what standardized tests kind of show. Colleges around the country, and if you meet with any admissions officer or go to any tours, they stress the importance of your GPA and your high school transcript. And this is because they're able to take your grades, especially in core classes like math and English and things like that, and take your unweighted grades and create their own GPA. So each college kind of creates their own student profile and student GPA for each individual student to put them all on the same level. And I think that's important, especially for test optional schools, because that's one of their main things. And also I think that at any school, whether it's test optional or not, the high school transcript and GPA is weighed more than the standardized tests in the admission process.
Yeah, certainly. And GPAs are incredibly important because they literally show how much a student has been working at their school, usually. However, it's very difficult to be able to compare GPAs from school to school, as I've already said, because even though a school may try to calculate a perfect GPA calculator where you can take all of the core classes and which ones of those are APs and which ones are honors and take that across every single high school throughout the United States, it's impossible to do that fairly, right? Because they cannot know how rigorous a certain teacher is at some school in Iowa versus a school in Florida, right? It's impossible to know that for sure, whereas with SATs and ACTs, it's all the same throughout, which makes it more fair for students and fair for colleges trying to assess these students.
So also touching on another point that I mentioned in my article, I think that test optional universities do more than just support students with test anxiety, as I mentioned earlier. If you've taken the tests, you know how expensive they are. I think that there's a trend nowadays that maybe wasn't a couple years ago of students taking it as many times as they can to get the best score. And that is just money down the drain, in my opinion. Each test may be $60 to $80, depending on if you choose essay or no essay. And I think that students who have more money are at a greater advantage of getting a better score, because you can get a tutor, which costs maybe $60 an hour sometimes. And then you're paying for these tests over and over again, and students who don't have those resources or the money to pay for them are at a disadvantage then to students who have the money and have the resources to do better on these standardized tests.
Yeah. So I think when we're looking at what people are spending money on for getting into college, right? Compared to the cost that colleges, including the University of Chicago, including Sewanee, the University of the South, and other test optional schools, the greatest cost detriment to students is the cost of actually going to college. So I don't think that the reason these schools are going test optional is to save their students money, because people spend maximum, let's say, $500. $500 is a lot of money, but compared to the $70,000 per semester it is to attend, like Dartmouth, say, it is very minimal. So it's not really going to be a deciding factor for many of these students.
Right, I think it's important to say that I don't think the colleges are trying to benefit the students in cost at all. I think that it's beneficial for those students who don't have the resources to look at these colleges and say, okay, I can't pay for a tutor and I can only take the SAT maybe the one time that the school offers it. So I'm going to try really hard, but if I don't do well, that's not a no from a college then. Yeah. I can still go to a college and give them my GPA, something I've worked 4 years for, and say, hey, this is what I have, and I wasn't able to pay for a tutor and 5 Saturdays of my life.
That's very understandable. And so when we're looking at all of these colleges and universities that are going test optional, there are definitely very solid arguments on either side. I would argue more towards the it's bad to go test optional side, but that should be up to y'all.
Thanks.